Hi, in this episode we'll look at baking out our high-res model into a normal map for quicker rendering speeds, and I'll quickly go through my cycles node setup for the final texture. It's fairly basic, but a quick way to get quite nice results. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to get the high resolution detail into a low resolution model. So in order to do that, I create two copies of my old man and apply the multi-resolution modifier, one with a high resolution and one with a low resolution. So I've labeled that one high res, copied it, and this one be low res. So apply the high res, go to the low res model, bring down all your subdivisions. I could go all the way to the bottom, but I want to keep a bit of detail, so I'm keeping it at one subdivision and applying that. In order to make sure that our low poly mesh is above our high poly mesh, we need to go into edit mode, making sure that your pivot point is at bounding box center. Then you can press Alt S and it will scale it like this, which is scaling along the normals. So once you've moved it, you can actually change the offset here on your bottom left. And that's a bit too much, that's too little. Can you see around the eyelids it's a little bit messed up, so really gently, so 0.005, and see how that looks. That should be minus. And then just check around, make sure it's all above. It's done quite well. There's a few areas, and it's probably best just to go in and pull the vertex around. Press O for proportional edit tool, or come down here, and then you can just grab these vertices. Oh, that's way too much though. Press G and then move your circle of influence and just pull them out. So just go around checking. You can group select a few and then pull them out as well. Go around, check a few there, and just make sure there's nothing sticking out. I changed the viewport color to try and help see the shapes come through, but I forgot to change it on the high res underneath, so it didn't make that much difference really. So change the viewport color of both your objects and then you'll be able to see the colors coming through a little bit easier. Okay, so we're pretty much there, but for the sake of the tutorial I'll leave it. I'm sure it could do with some more tidying up. Now in order to bake we will need a new material, so we'll click a new material and we'll call it Old Man Bake 5, because I've probably done a couple of these before, and it's a good idea to have it a nice high resolution like 2048, and press OK. Now this is my current node setup. All I've got is the painted texture into a diffuse, so it's quite dull at the moment, and you can see this is the low res model, so it's got none of that detail. So if I duplicate this and then put my Old Man Bake 5 in there, if I have this selected, it's now the active texture. So when I go to my bake panel down the bottom here, it will use that texture when I press bake. We're going to set it to normal, select it to active, and just put the ray distance up to 1. Now you can use cages. For organic models like this, it seems to work just as well selected to active without a cage. So we have to do exactly that. Selected is the high res to the active, so we're going from the high res to the low res, shift click the low res, and then press bake. You'll see this panel up here, and that will tell you how far it's going and how you're getting on. So if I maximize this screen for a moment, you can see there's issues where I didn't tidy it up properly around the eyes, the ears, and the neck in places. But all this information here is very good, and there's no problem. And all over the shoulders. There's two ways of dealing with this. You can be a bit more precise. You can use a cage, or you can go into Photoshop and blur the edges out. I'm not going to show you any of that process because it's beyond the scope of this tutorial. It is better practice to use a cage, but this way is less complex and you can get good results. So let's link it up to test it. Make sure you've got it set to non-color data, just there. Shift A to select a vector node and a normal map. Just there, from the color to the color, and the normal to the normal. Shift Z to preview that, and it's not looking too bad. you can start to see some of the detail. You can of course adapt the strength here if you want more detail. So what we could do with doing now is setting up our nodes. I'll maximize this screen with Shift Spacebar and space out my nodes. Okay, so I need a mix shader and a glossy. So now we've got a bit of shininess. And make sure the normal's in both of them. We need the drawn material into both the diffuse and the glossy. And there we go, it's not looking too bad now. The roughness is okay-ish, but it's not great. What would be better than a diffuse is a subsurface scattering. So I'll delete that, Shift A, shader, subsurface scattering. And I'll go into the color there, and the output there. And it's looking better, but it's looking a bit waxy. We can change the scale of this to change down the influence. Subsurface scattering is where the light passes through objects and bounces around inside them. So where the skin is narrow around the ears, for example, you should see light coming through them. And you can see that's a lot better with the subsurface scattering. The problem with the subsurface scattering is the render times and the noise. So I'll have to turn my samples up a fair bit and just start tweaking the settings until you're happy with the results. So you need the right amount of glossiness and shininess, but not too much so it looks waxy, and the right amount of subsurface scattering so it doesn't look less lifelike. After a bit of editing, this is what I ended up with. I hope that gives you some idea of basic baking and my texture node setup.